Welcome to this special Commonwealth Policy PAC special presentation. I'm Richard Nelson, Executive Director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. With us tonight is State Auditor Mike Harmon. Mike, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Hey, in this day of social distancing and the COVID pandemic, we have learned how to use Zoom and other digital technology well. And pleased that you're joining us tonight for this special evening with State Auditor, in particular for our Political Action Committee and the activity that we've been involved with across the state, helping true conservatives get elected to the legislature. And Mike, I wanted you to join us and to share your observations and your experience with Commonwealth Policy PAC over the past several years, because you are bringing a perspective that many people don't have. And of course, the purpose in this event is to help raise money for those conservative candidates who are running for the state House and Senate. And you have been on the side of a number of campaigns for the House and then also for auditor twice on the ballot. But you've been on the side of trying to raise money, and maybe the short end of the stick, if you will, of just not having a whole lot of campaign funds. But I wanted you to come and share just a little bit about your story, your experience with us, your experience in the campaign trail. And we're going to be on Facebook Live here for about a half hour. Okay. For all the viewers tuning in, we thank you for joining us.
Very much so.
Before I forget, I want to thank all of the sponsors who have helped to make this event a success already. So if you look at the top, I believe it's on the right side of your page, you'll see a program of the sponsors who have donated to make this a successful event. So please thank those sponsors along with me. And with that said, Auditor Mike Harmon, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Well, it's an honor to be here tonight. It's kind of weird, I've been doing this for the last 6 or 7 months, but still kind of weird. I always like to tell jokes, and it's hard for people, to hear jokes. But usually what I try to do if I'm talking to staff, if I remember, I have them turn unmute just to see if they're going to laugh or make fun of me or anything like that. But, the first thing I always start out when I'm kind of talking to people on the trail, especially since the last election is elections have consequences. Now, I know in 2019, one of the major consequences we had was obviously we lost Governor Bevin as our governor, and we ended up getting Governor Beshear. But there was actually something else that occurred, Richard, that a lot of people don't really realize. After the last election, I am currently the oldest serving constitutional officer in Kentucky by 10 years.
Wow.
By 10 years. The next closest is Michael Adams. Now, he's 10 years younger than I am. The governor's 11 years younger than I am. So as you can imagine, I was feeling a little down, feeling a little bit old. And the other day I was looking in the mirror, and my wife walks by, and I look at her and I look at the mirror and I say, sweetheart, of course we've been married over 30 years, just this last July. I said, sweetheart, I look so old. I look so tired. Can you just tell me something, just something good about myself to make me kind of pep me up? She looked and she thought, and then she paused and she said, well, at least your eyesight's still good. So I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of moans out there, but she did not actually do that. She is the love of my life. Give you a little background about myself before I talk about the Commonwealth Policy Center. I've actually, as Richard had said, I have been around the block for a while. 96, we came back. I grew up in Kentucky, but we went out to California. 96, we came back and went down to vote. And there was only one person on the ballot for a state representative. And I looked at my wife and thought about it, and I said, honey, he may be the nicest person ever, but this is not Russia. People need to have an opportunity to vote. Even if they vote against you, people need to have an opportunity to vote. So I thought about it, prayed about it. Yep. And I won't go a lot, but I'll just tell you that I ran in 98. I only raised, it was in an area that was only 25% registered Republican. raised about $3,300, but I knocked on every door, got about 43% of the vote, which is pretty good in the area for pretty much an unknown. And I was going against at that time the guy that had been there for a long time. He decided not to run, and the mayor of Danville had come out of the primary, so I lost that one. 2000 comes around, think about it, pray about it. I run again. Well, that time I raised, I think, like maybe $5,500. And of course, the previous time my opponent had raised about 45. This time my opponent raised about 45. I knocked on every door, and I ended up getting about 49.3%. So I lost by less than 200 votes. So needless to say, I was a little disappointed. Thought about it, prayed about it. And then in 2002, I ran again. That time, the former mayor, who had been state rep for 2 terms, decided not to run again. I don't know if it's because it got close or he just decided he didn't like it, but he didn't run again. And they ended up running an attorney against me. Now, no offense to our attorneys out there. I have several on staff, or 2 on staff, and lots of wonderful people. But that particular attorney had sued a lot of the local doctors. Well, that time I raised about 35,000 compared to his still raised about 45, and ended up getting 57% of the vote. Well, I ended up doing that, and then just to kind of condense a little bit later, in about 2010, God was kind of laying on my heart to run statewide. And so I thought about it, prayed about it, went and talked to a few people about it. I wrote 3 different, positions to run statewide on, still prayed about it. And it was clear as mud. And finally, one night I prayed a prayer and I said, Lord, if you're really leading me to run for a higher office, you're going to have to make it clear, because right now it's clear as mud. I'll do it, but you need to tell me what it is. Well, about 2 weeks after I prayed that prayer, I get a call from a fella, and he says, hey, there's this businessman in Louisville that wants you to run for lieutenant governor. He wants to run for governor, and he wants you to run for lieutenant governor. I said, well, okay, I'll go talk to him. And I went and talked to him. Name of the fellow was Phil Moffitt. Some of you all know him. And so we ran. Now, we had a tough primary because at that time it was the president of the Senate, David Williams, and at that time a very popular Richie Farmer, who was the ag commissioner, former UK basketball star. And we did quite well. We still lost, and it was a 3-way race because Bobby Holtz-Call and Bill Vermillion were the 3rd one in there. I think we lost by like 13,000 votes. But I did travel the state. I talked to a lot of people. I think at that time we had raised maybe about $120,000. So they had several million, including some super PACs and things like that. But as it turned out, it wasn't meant to be. But I met a lot of people, and so a few years later, rode around, and I, thought maybe I was supposed to run again. Prayed about it. Thought maybe I was supposed to run for Secretary of State, primarily because I had served on elections, constitutional amendments, and intergovernmental affairs all those years when I was in the House. And every time I prayed about it, God kept closing that door. I remember my wife and I, even we took like a little retreat where we prayed about it and took some time, and just felt like God closed that door. But I still felt like He wanted me to run statewide. Well, a couple of things happened, and then I felt like, well, maybe we had one of our gubernatorial candidates come through, so we need a good auditor. Had a couple of people suggest. Oddly enough, one of the people that suggested was the person that replaced me in the state house. Another person that suggested was the person that I ran against in the state house as a Democrat. Well, he was a Democrat years ago. And so I thought about, prayed about, that door opened, and I ran. Well, Richard, as you know, fundraising was never my greatest strength. And I raised about 45,000. I was up against Adam Eaglin, who had 800,000. He was the incumbent. Rachel Maddow had described him as the next up and coming Bill Clinton, from the South. And so it didn't look good. It didn't look good. So, but you do what you're supposed to do. You feel like God leads you to do it, so you do it. About 3 weeks before that election, God laid on my heart to get 5 stones. Now, of course, like the David and Goliath. So I was thinking, where am I going to find 5 stones? Do I go outside? And I thought, oh, my wife, she had given me a few years ago a rock collection. I mean, a rock tumbler. I don't know if you've ever seen them. If you're old like me, it's basically you put, it's like filled with sand that spins, and you put non-smooth stones, you put it in there, and after about a month, they become smooth. Well, she got that as a gag gift for me because I'd wanted one as a kid. And I never used it, it gathered dust, which is not a good thing. But, I ended up pulling 5 stones. Now, they weren't smooth stones. My wife tells me they could have been, but they weren't 5 smooth stones like David's. So I put those in a little baggie, shoved them in my pocket. And about 2 weeks beforehand, of course, I'm thinking, I feel like, why am I carrying 5 stones in my pocket? But I felt like God led me to do it, so I did it. Well, about 2 weeks before, I talked to one of my good friends from the house. He was of the opposite political party, but very strong Christian. And I was telling him about, the 5 stones. He said, I got this book for you to read. I'm like, man, I am getting up before everybody else, driving all over this state, talking to everybody I can, not sleeping much. How in the world am I going to have time to read this book? He said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He marked 11 pages. And he said, just read these 11 pages. And I read those 11 pages, and there were some few things, but the thing that stuck in my mind was, he said, the underdog wins a third of the time. Mm-hmm. And they say that the underdog, it was a Maxwell book. He said the underdog, David and Goliath. He said the underdog wins a third of the time. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but, part of it is, obviously, you got to trust in the Lord. And part of it is, and this is kind of my paraphrase, is you kind of almost got to get a little bit crazy. You got to leave it all on the field. You got to do everything you can. And, as it turned out, the night of the election, some friends of mine, Phil Moffitt, Stanley, we were in the hotel room watching the results come back in, and they were flipping back and forth. And I was down nine points in the polls, but that night they were flipping back and forth. So I said, guys, let's get together. Let's just say a little prayer. I said, Lord, I'm going to praise you whether I win. And I was thinking like facing the Giants. I'm going to praise you whether I win or praise you whether I lose. But Lord, I could really use a victory. And right as soon as I said that, bam, it flipped to me, and it never turned back. And we ended up moving forth and winning. So it was a true blessing. Now, let me talk a little bit about the Commonwealth Policy Center, or in this case, the Commonwealth Policy Pack. They have been very helpful, not only to myself, who many times struggles to raise funds. It did pretty good last time. In for my reelection, we did pretty decent. But they come alongside not only myself, but others in giving them training. And I've actually participated in helping educate some others to walk that, from a standpoint. So we appreciate all their efforts and training. I kind of am attracted. I'm not saying that they or the people that they train are underdogs, but I'm kind of led to go to the underdogs, because almost every race I ever ran in my life, I was the underdog. Even as a child, I was an underdog, overweight, pigeon-toed. But anyway, that's another story. So we do appreciate their effort, and it does take money. It takes money for them to do the training, but it also takes money to help these other candidates. And these are good, conservative, Christian candidates that come along the side to get those training, get it out. And of course, now with COVID, it's all the more important. Some people are still trying to do door to door, and sometimes it's welcome, sometimes it's not. But you got to get the message out. And in my particular case, in RPK, they are wonderful, but Republican Party of Kentucky, they are wonderful. But, sometimes they have limited assets. Sometimes they, try to quantify, what's the best use for the funds. And sometimes the underdogs get left out. When I ran that first time for the State House, I only had about 3,300. Oddly enough, on that one, they did a poll right there about 3 weeks out, and they were like, oh my gosh, this guy could win. So they actually, that year, they did put about $7,700 in direct mailers. So if you count that, it's about 10. That 2 years later, where I raised $5,500, they thought, well, this guy's not going to make it. We're going to put our assets somewhere else. And someone had told me the story later on that I found out that they had given one of the other state reps had come in and fussed and was concerned about losing. And so they put money into his race instead of mine. And that particular one, I think they said ended up getting 65% of the vote, and I lost by less than 200. So that person bemoaned the fact that they had just invested another 5 or 7 in my particular race. But, God has a plan. But at the same time, it points out that there is a need to get that message out. So from a standpoint, anything that you can do to help with the Commonwealth Policy Center, anything that you can do to help us. And I think, Richard, you had told me that you all are trying to do some matches and things as well.
We had, very briefly, Mike, we had a very generous donor that put out $75,000 towards our political efforts. This was towards Commonwealth Policy PAC in our efforts to help true conservatives get elected to the legislature, primarily the state house. And that was put out a while ago. So we're very grateful for that. Still receiving funds for the PAC. And if I could add something to your point about running for auditor, when you ran, not a whole lot of people gave you a chance. It wasn't just your race. I don't know what the chances were for some of the other candidates, where the Republicans really had a good slate back in 2015. I don't think Matt Bevin was given much of a chance, but several conservatives did get into office that year.
Yeah.
We were very involved with all of those races. We produced voter guides that showed a clear difference between the candidates when it came to core social issues like the sanctity of life, like religious freedom, like marriage between a man and a woman. In fact, 2015 was the year when the U.S. Supreme Court redefined marriage for the rest of the country.
And as you recall, Richard, in 2015, we only lost 2 races. One of them was the Secretary of State by only about 20-some thousand votes. The other one, which was pivotal, was the Attorney General. Whitney Westerfeld lost by like a little over 2,000 votes. That created the dynamics of Beshear going after Bevin on almost every policy.
No, that's very good point. Point well taken. We were involved with all of those races. We put together voter guides, distributed them digitally. In one of the cases, we actually did more. We did a direct mail piece in the governor's race. But we got involved with these long shot candidates, if you will, your race. Sure. We made endorsements in those races as well. And we very clearly communicated who had those values and represented the values that we believe make Kentucky a stronger, better place. Mike, you know that we began back in 2012 with the goal of shoring up the pillars of society. I just mentioned a few of them: the sanctity of life, marriage between a man and a woman, religious freedom, fiscal responsibility is that 4th pillar. And we raise up and strengthen these pillars by recruiting and, as you mentioned, training candidates, and then helping them get elected to the state legislature. And in these eight plus years that we've been around, we have seen the legislature flip from liberal Democrat to conservative Republican back in 2016. When that happened, it was like a dam breaking loose. We've seen 10 pro-life bills enacted into law,
Richard,
right?
And the funniest thing is that I was in the House in the minority for 13 years. The moment I left the House and went to the auditor's office, the House became majority Republican. My big joke is, if I'd known that's all it would take, I would have left years ago. But,
and I think people might have encouraged it to leave. But of course, when you were in the House, Mike, you were a solid conservative vote. Yes. And I'm sure that your efforts there were much appreciated. I think it was providential, and maybe the timing. And as in politics, timing is everything, right? I think it just happened.
And it's important. This year's elections especially are important, Richard. For one, we need to keep the supermajority. I used to go into schools and take a group of kids and say, okay, you're all part of the House. And then I take another little section of them and say, okay, y'all the favorites committee. And we don't have a favorites committee up there, but it was something kind of them to grasp it. And then I would take maybe the meekest or the out of place student in that subcommittee and say, okay, and you're the chairman. And inevitably, Richard, they would act just the same as we did up there. They would nominate, favorite, whatever. But probably the one that made me laugh the most was, I did this, generally it was high schoolers, but for some reason I did this with fourth graders one time and over at the Christian school. And they were nominating favorite toys. And the chairman, Madam Chairman of the committee, did as she normally did. She was wiping out about half the toys. So they didn't vote on about half. Well, one little boy's toy got wiped out. The chairman wasn't going to vote out. He broke down crying. And I just had to look at him, Richard, and said, I know exactly how you feel, because I'm obviously in the minority. But it's very important, because not only does leadership to control, the chairmanships and the direction of the bills that can get out or don't get out. This year, if everything goes according to plan, there'll also be redistricting. And that will determine the course for the congressional seats, as well as the state house and the state senate, for at least 10 years to come.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So elections, to your point, elections matter. And
elections have consequences.
Yeah, that's right. They have consequences. They matter. This is perhaps one of the biggest elections in our lifetime. And we say that, of course, every election, right? But
but this time it really is. I mean, every time it is, but it's just been escalating because of the divide. When I first started, there was some of this bickering and some of this demonizing. But Richard, it's terrible now. I mean, you see now the opposition is not just the opposition. They also want to label you as evil.
Yeah.
And, this side is not evil if we're the least of that. I mean, we are the last remaining people to stand in the gap to defend, our faith and defend our families and defend this Constitution. And if we're not there, the whole thing is going to bust open.
Mike, there's a new term that's come on the scene just a few months ago. I heard it for the first time. It's called cancel culture. And cancel culture is where if you have one group, one political ideology that doesn't like the other political ideology, they will try to marginalize, belittle, discredit, and demonize that person. They're canceling them out. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things that we're facing in our country today. We've lost the ability to have discussion and to discourse, and instead of having a reasonable conversation or even a debate, a spirited debate, you'd rather cancel somebody out, push them off the scene and say, your views are so wrong, we don't even want to hear about it. That is so un-American. It is so unhealthy for the body politic, and it's something that I would say not just as political leaders that we should stand against this, but the mainstream news media ought to stand against it as well. Other people in places of influence, university leaders should stand against it. Public school teachers should stand against it. That is so un-American to absolutely cancel out somebody, to belittle and marginalize. Doesn't matter what political party you're in, what your affiliation is, we all need to stand against the cancel culture.
Well, and history has shown that cancel culture type philosophies don't bode well in the future. I think, was it Zimbabwe that you had the two different competing tribes, and they would basically belittle the features of one or the other, and then basically they rationalized the genocide or the attempted genocide. I believe that was the one, if I remember correctly.
It was actually Rwanda.
Rwanda, yes, I'm sorry, you're right. It was
the Hutus and the Tutsis, and
yes.
It was actually racism, Mike. Since you brought this up, they had different features. They were both Black Africans. They had different features, and one tribe marginalized and singled out the other. There's a little more history to that, but in either case, it ended poorly, where there were close to 1 million people who were murdered, who were killed in that genocide. So very unfortunate. And this is something right now, before we see any more violence escalate, we need to take a stand against it.
Very much so. We have lost, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg had mentioned the fact that, you should be able to disagree, but disagree cordially. without being disagreeable. So
That may, and those were wise words. I don't agree with her, did not agree with her much
correct.
politically, but I can
Right.
wholeheartedly agree with her on that comment on civility. Mike, I want to share with those who are tuning in on Facebook Live. If you're just joining us, my name is Richard Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Commonwealth Policy Center, and this is a special evening with the State Auditor. Mike Harmon is opposite me. And Mike, today the
Not
Commonwealth.
politically, though.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're on the same page politically, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here with us.
Correct.
Yeah. So today, the Commonwealth Policy PAC just released its endorsements and recommendations for the State House and State Senate seats. We also released voter guides for, I want to say, about 70 some voter guides for the House. We had close to 10 or so for the Senate. Those election resources can be found on the Commonwealth Policy Center website. Just look under the political tab. There's a drop-down box, and you can find the one that says endorsements. And then there's a box that says voter guides. Also today, we just rolled out videos for 16 state house races that we are targeting. There are 15 non-incumbent Republicans and actually one independent in that group that we are supporting. We've put together about a 30-second video, and that is being distributed digitally through Facebook and then also Google AdWords. Some of the viewers may see that pop up on their feeds as well. And Mike, to your point earlier, it takes resources to do these kind of things. It takes resources to produce the videos. It takes resources to research and to put together a quality voter guide. And actually, I didn't mention this, but those in the 16 races that we're targeting, we have printed, it's about 90,000 printed voter guides that are being mailed to 90,000 households in those 16 districts. So it takes money to print and then to directly mail the voter guides as well. And I want to thank our sponsors who got behind this event tonight and said, yes, I want to invest in conservative candidates. I want to invest in a better Kentucky, and we're going to donate to Commonwealth Policy PAC. You can see the sponsors posted. It's pinned at the top of the Facebook page there on the Commonwealth Policy Center website. And, if there's somebody tuning in right now and saying, man, I've never heard of this group, I'm not aware of what they've been doing, and maybe I want to partner with them, I'm glad you asked because you can donate on the Commonwealth Policy Center website. Just go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org, and on the far right, and I'm not just speaking ideologically, but on the far right of the website, you will find the donate tab, and you will find a place to donate to the PAC there as well. Bottom line is it takes resources to get the message out about who the candidates are, where they stand on the issues, and about those candidates who would best represent your values. So with that said, if there are any questions out there, we promise to keep this short. We're about 28 minutes into this, but if there are any questions in the viewership, we've got time to take a few questions. I can't guarantee that we'll have an answer, at least I'll speak for myself. Can't guarantee I'll have an answer, but feel free to pitch us a question either to myself or to Auditor Harmon, and we will try to answer anything that you might have. Auditor Harmon, do you have any other closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to share?
Well, I think the most important thing is whenever you run or when you are running to bathe everything in prayer. It's very important for us to do that. In the end, we need the resources, but we also know that God will provide the resources that we do need. But I certainly think it's important. I have appreciated what the Commonwealth Policy PAC has done in the past for myself and for others. But this is a fight. I mean, this is a fight, and we've got to make sure that we get as many good Christian conservatives in office as we can to protect our Constitution and to protect our faith.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well said. Just a few moments ago, we were talking about cancel culture and it not ending well. Uh, we need to be mindful of what's happening in Louisville right now,
Yes.
where the mayor and law enforcement is preparing for violence to break out there. The grand jury is expected to come down with the findings in the Breonna Taylor case any time now. And I want to encourage the viewers to be in prayer for Louisville, for law enforcement, for the mayor there as they're going through very difficult times. I want to encourage everybody to make sure that you vote and then to vote your values: pro-life, pro-religious freedom, pro-constitution. If you care about those things, then you must get out and to vote. Find the candidates that would best represent your values. Make sure that you vote for them on election day. Actually, you can still request a ballot from the Secretary of State's office. Get on their website to request a ballot to be sent to you if you don't feel comfortable going out in person. In-person voting begins October the 13th. Every county in Kentucky will have a polling place or multiple polling places open. October the 13th is when that happens. November the 3rd is election day. So that's the normal election day. If you're not registered to vote, there might be a few people that are saying, I'm not registered, or maybe I moved recently and I'm not in that previous location, or maybe you just turned 18 and you're of legal age right now to vote. There is still time to get registered to vote. October the 5th is the last day to register. So we've got just a little less than 2 weeks, a week and a half or so to get registered. You can get registered online on the Secretary of State's website. I believe it's sos.ky.gov. You can register there.
An interest, of course, a little past, but Richard, an interesting statistic or maybe a law that people are not aware of. If early on in this season, or really any time that there's a race, if you are 17 but will turn 18 by the November election, you can actually register and vote in a primary at 17 in Kentucky. A lot of people don't realize that.
I was not aware of that either. Thank you for
Yes.
sharing that. Of course, we don't have a primary.
The primaries
Right
are
now,
passed, but in the future, if you have one of your family members, it's always good to get people to vote early and make sure that they do this particular civic duty, because, it's important. I mean, so many people, we've had a higher turnout this time, but generally we consider ourselves blessed to have the 40 or 50% turnout, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, that is. Auditor Mike Harmon, thank you so much for joining us. We didn't receive any questions. That must mean we have a large group of people out there in total agreement and in favor of what we're doing. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I want to leave you with this final encouragement to make sure you get registered to vote. If you're not registered, plan to vote in one of a number of ways: mail-in, early voting, or on election day on November the 3rd. And then to vote your values. If you are not familiar with the candidates or sure about where they stand, the Commonwealth Policy Center and the Commonwealth Policy PAC has compiled election resources. We've gone through great efforts, very involved process to investigate the candidates. We've interviewed them. We've looked at voting records, and we have put together voter guides for most of the state house and most of the state senate races. We will have voter guides coming out on the congressional races, hopefully early next week. Those will be available. And then you can also check out our endorsements for the House and Senate. You can go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org. That's commonwealthpolicycenter.org, and you will find under the political tab those election resources. If you'd like to donate to CPC, on the far right side of the page, you'll see the red donate tab. Just click on that tab and a drop box will come up and it will lead you to the PAC, and you can donate to our PAC there. Auditor Harmon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
God bless, and you have a good evening.
You too. You have a great evening. God bless.